Hi, everybody. This is Bob Goodwin, and welcome to another episode of Career Club Live. I am super excited about our guest today, which we'll get to in just a moment. But first, wanted to let you guys know that we've got some new free resources available on our site. This week, we have a promotion on the 3 things that might be holding you back in your job search, where we cover attitude, activities, and the ask that you should be asking for when you're networking, and it may not be what you think. So please check that out at career.club. So as I said, I'm very excited about our guest today. It is Whitney Johnson, and she has quite the background, which I want to read some of it to you. So Whitney is the CEO and co-founder of Disruption Advisors and is a world-class coach, globally recognized thought leader, keynote speaker, and consultant, where she helps organizations operationalize a high growth mindset in their leaders and teams. We're going to talk about that quite a bit. She's also the host of a very popular podcast called Disrupt Yourself, and is the author of a number of bestsellers, including How to Build an A-Team, Disrupt Yourself, Dare, Dream, Do, and most recently, Smart Growth, How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company. With that, Whitney, welcome.
Bob, thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
No, it's so nice to have you. As is our wont, we do like to ask just a couple of icebreaker questions to get to know you as a human being first before we get into that big brain of yours. So just very simply, where were you born and raised? Where are you from?
I was actually born in Madrid, Spain, because my parents were living over there for about a year. So that's always fun because I've always thought I was Spanish, even though I'm completely not. And grew up in San Jose, California. I went to a high school called Leland High School. Lived there until I went to college. I went to college at Brigham Young University in Utah,
Yeah,
and then moved to New York right after I graduated, and have lived in Boston and now live in Virginia.
very cool. What was your major at BYU?
Music.
Tell me more about that.
Yes, right. It's super logical that I majored in music and we're not talking about music on this show. Well, I started playing piano at a really young age. I still remember going to see Sound of Music and coming home and playing
Mm.
do, re, mi on the piano, and I loved it. Got to college and didn't really have a sense at that point in time of like, you go to college and you figure out what you're going to do to make money. Like that wasn't computing. And my mom really wanted me to major in music, and so I did. But when I graduated from college, had gotten married, my husband and I moved to New York, I realized, oh, I need to make money because he's in school. And that started my career of being a secretary on Wall Street and then working my way up.
No, and I remember you were a Wall Street analyst, which maybe will take us to the next place, which is, do you mind just kind of painting the picture a little bit of your career arc?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, I graduated in music, moved to New York right after college. I actually wanted to be a flight attendant, but they didn't hire me. And so looking for work. I am a music major. I don't really have very much confidence. I'm a woman. It's the late 80s. And so my first job is as a secretary and for a retail stockbroker. 1345 Avenue of the Americas, in case anybody cares. And so I would go to work every day, and I'm this working as a secretary, but I'm sitting across from a bunch of up and coming stockbrokers who are saying things like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know this is a good stock investment, or, throw down your pom poms and get in your game. And at first I'm very offended because I was a cheerleader in high school, but then had this big aha that I needed to throw down my pom poms. And so I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance,
Mm.
economics, and that led to having a boss who also believed in me, being willing to promote me onto the professional track of being an investment banking analyst. So I did that for several years. Then my boss got fired, and they were going to fire me too, I think. But I had strong performance reviews. I happened to be pregnant at the time, which was a little bit of job security. And so they moved me
Mm.
into equity research. I was absolutely disrupted, but it turns out this career move that I didn't want um, was a career maker for me. I was very good as a stock picker, did that for close to 10 years, became award winning, and then disrupted myself of going out and becoming an entrepreneur, I had discovered Clayton Christensen's work. I tried a bunch of different things, like let's produce a soccer show or a reality show about soccer in Latin America, kind of like American Idol. A bunch of things. It didn't work. But then eventually connected with Clay Christensen and started a fund with him and his son investing in disruptive innovation. Did that for the better part of a decade, but then realized that what I really truly cared about was the momentum, not of stocks, but of people. That I was interested not in how products and services disrupt, but how do people disrupt. And so in 2012, so about a decade ago now, I went off on my own and started a company of what has become today is Disruption Advisors, where we help you make sure or ensure that as you're scaling, your people are growing as fast as the projected growth of your company. And we do that through our assessment and through high impact activities like coaching and offsites. So that is my career trajectory in just a few short minutes.
No, I think that's awesome. I mean, obviously a career club, what we're doing is helping people find a career that matters to them. And oftentimes that, includes reinvention
Yeah.
and, as you say, disrupting yourself. And I think that, some of these nonlinear ways that, your career has
Mhm.
progressed, is very cool. It's also, I think, empowering. You talked
Mm.
about, particularly for women, and that you can be what you want. I think that not being forced into a mold that somebody else told you this is what you should be doing, but what was of interest to you. I think you uncovered some latent talents
Yeah.
that you had, and then you developed some of them into world class skill. I mean, all of that I think is super cool and a kind of inspiration that we like to bring to listeners and to our clients. So I'm loving your story.
Okay, well, so we can unpack it then, maybe, or if it's useful.
That is exactly what we're going to do. So I mentioned that you've got your most recent book out called Smart
Mhm.
Growth, and it talks about the S curve of learning. Can you, first of all, just sort of unpack S curve, and then
Yeah.
what's the S curve of learning?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned a moment ago, I discovered that I was more interested in the momentum of people than stocks, and then the theory of disruption, applying it to people, not just products and services. And so I started to have this tendency, really, of how do I take management theory and apply it to people. And so when we were investing with Clayton and looking at how quickly innovations would be adopted, we were using something called the S curve that was popularized by Everett Rogers 50, 60 years ago. And it's the adoption curve that people might be familiar with. And as we were using this S curve or this adoption curve to say, initially adoption is going to be really slow, but then it's going to accelerate. And then at some point you use saturation or reach saturation. I had this insight that we could also use the S curve not only to look at how do groups change or adopt an innovation over time, but how do individuals change? How do we learn and how we grow? And at its simplest, the way I think about using the S curve for us as individuals is this. There are three major parts. There's the launch point, so the base of the curve. There's the sweet spot, which is the steep, sleek back of the curve. And then there's mastery, which is that top plateau of the curve. And the way we can use it in terms of growth and development is we say, when I start something new, for example, I start a new job, I am at the launch point of the curve. And what's going on for me emotionally here is I'm excited to be here. Usually, sometimes we get disrupted, but let's say we've chosen to be here. So there's a thrill. But because our brain is running a predictive model, it's making predictions. Most of them are inaccurate because we're doing something new. Our dopamine drops, which is the chemical messenger of delight. And we have this experience of being discouraged, sometimes overwhelmed, frustrated, feel like an imposter, and we feel like we're not growing. Interestingly, mathematically, we're growing very quickly. In fact, we're growing the fastest at that launch point of the curve than anywhere else. But because it's not yet apparent, the experience that we're having is it feels like growth is very slow. So that's the launch point, which explains why it's difficult for most people to start something new. All right, so then there's the second part of the curve, which is the sweet spot. And this is the place where you're continuing to run that predictive model in your brain, and your predictions are increasingly accurate. And so you have these emotional upside surprises. Your dopamine is spiking, and there's this sense of exhilaration. So, this is the place where, if you're on a new project or in a new role, you feel this sense of autonomy, like I know how to do this. You feel competent, you feel related or connected to the work that you're doing and the people that you're doing the work with. So that's the place where growth not only is fast, it feels fast, which is why it's very easy to keep going when you're in the sweet spot of the curve. Then the third part is mastery. And mastery is that top portion of the curve. The predictive model you've now predicted. It is correct. It is accurate. You've debugged the computer programming. What happens here, though, is because you're no longer learning, because you're not learning, you're not getting a lot of dopamine. There's this feeling inside of you that I've done what I came to do, and maybe there's even this feeling of there's more for me to do on this planet. And so now you have a bit of a dilemma, because on the one hand, you like being on top of that curve. You've got it figured out. You're a master of all you survey. You know how to do things here. But because your brain needs more dopamine, because learning is the oxygen of human growth, you and most of us make that decision. I'm going to walk into that dilemma, and I'm going to find a way to jump to a new learning curve or challenge myself such that I push myself back into the sweet spot of that curve. So you now have a way to describe what growth feels like. It's slow, and then it's fast, and then it's slow. And you can use this very simple visual framework whenever you take on something new to encapsulate that experience of what growth feels like.
Super helpful. So you use it in the context of like starting a new job as an
Mhm.
example, but there's multiple facets in our lives, right? And I'm going to
Yeah.
suspect that we find ourselves at different places on different curves. Can you talk just for a minute about the portfolio of S
Yeah.
curves that we might have in our lives?
Yeah, as you just said, we're not, I mean, it's a fractal, right? You can say, my life is an S curve, and in fact, it is. And you can say, your career is an S curve. But what you just raised, Bob, is that if you think about it, we're on multiple curves at any given time. So you've
Mhm.
got your work curve, you've got your hobby curve, you've got your family curve, you've got your friends curve. And so, what you want to think about is, how do I optimize my portfolio of S curves? And what we usually think about is the standard bell curve distribution. You probably can only do 3 to 4 curves really well at any given time. And if you're looking at it from like this, you want to have 2 curves where you're in the sweet spot. You want to have one where you feel like I'm in mastery, like I can stabilize myself. I'm really good at this, which allows you to then have the confidence to take on something new where you feel like you don't know what you're doing. Where you can be challenged is if, for example, you've got 4 S curves, you've taken on a new job, you've moved to a new city, and you've just gotten married, and you've just had a new child. That's okay. But it's important to recognize that you probably are going to need extra support because you're doing a lot of new things at once. But by understanding that you've got this portfolio, you can do some load balancing of your S curves, and you can also get the support you need at the launch. Or if you've got 3 or 4 curves where you've been in the same city for 10 years, the same exact role for 10 years, you know, nothing new is happening. You can say to yourself, I probably need to take on something new so that I can continue to grow and develop as a human being. Because, and this goes to a foundational premise for me, I believe that growth is our default setting. So if we're not putting in ourselves in a situation where we can grow, then we're dying inside just a little. And none of us wants to die inside just a little.
No, and you talked about the dopamine, and I mean,
Mhm.
there's true neurological things and physiological things that are happening inside of our brains. Too much becomes stress, and I'm freaking out, right? And I'm
Exactly.
sort of in overload mode, which is not healthy. The other end of that spectrum would be I'm bored, like there's, you know, just
Yeah.
like I don't know, I don't know if I could ever retire. Like that sounds
No.
very unattractive to me. Like I would literally, I think, die of boredom. And so, you know, continuing to be challenged, but not always by the same thing. And there's
Yeah.
different things that we find challenging as we go. But you know, if you're not being, we'll probably use this in a second to the segue to disrupt yourself and, you know, dare, dream, do, and things like that. But one thing, there's big S curves and little S curves, I
Mhm.
suppose, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
one of the things that we see with our clients, and you've given me some new language to think about this with, is when somebody comes into a job search, most people don't know what to do, and it's frightening to them. They're confused. There's a lot of fear that goes into it, maybe even some shame, like how did I even get into this S curve that I don't want to be a
Mhm.
part of?
Mhm.
But when we start working with people and they start go, oh, there's a process, things start to settle down a little bit, and they start to climb up that curve a little bit. And usually we find the going from launch to sweet spot is I know my message. I know what my value
Yeah.
proposition is. I know how to communicate my value. One, because I believe it now. And two, I've got the words to express it to another human being in the way that they can understand it. The way I've been saying it is that's when the fever breaks. And they go
Hmm.
from like feeling
Mm.
sick to the way it is when a fever breaks. It's just like all of a sudden I feel like a ton better. And that's when they're in that sweet spot and it is fast.
Yeah. I love that. When you just describe that is when you have that clear messaging of here's what I do well, and here's how I can help other people, help other employers. I love that metaphor of the fever breaking and this idea of as soon as that kicks in, you're in a position to go into hyper growth. You're in a position to go into the sweet spot of your job search because you know who you are,
Exactly.
what you want to do, what you don't want to do. And that's where the acceleration takes place. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And an inverted S curve is when people get the order of operations wrong and they just want to
Mm.
be active. And like, I need to be doing something. So I'm out meeting a lot of people. But, the analogy I use is like airing bad TV commercials. You bought a Super Bowl spot. So you're in front of a lot of people. The
Yeah.
problem is your ad sucks. And like, you need to be off air until you get your ad right. And so when people get it flipped and they get it in the right order, that's when, again, I'm going to
Yeah.
start doing
Oh,
this all the time, I think. But yeah,
yeah, that's interesting too, because and so to plug that back into the framework of the S curve of there's at the launch point we do break it down into an explorer and a collector phase. And to your point,
mhm,
one of the things that happens when you're at the launch point is because it is so uncomfortable, we want to move off that quickly, and so we can start scurrying around. And yet, if we don't take the time to explore, to collect the data of like, is this the S curve I want to be on? Meaning, I've got my message straight so that I'll get what I want. That's where quarter life crises come in. That's where midlife crises come in because we took something that wasn't actually the best fit for us just to make the uncomfortable or that discomfort of uncertainty go away. And so it takes patience to be willing to stay at the launch point as long as we need to before we move into the sweet spot. So
so
patient,
the way we say
yeah.
that is
Mhm.
sometimes you need to slow down to hurry up.
Yep. Love it.
And
Mhm.
doing the assessments. And again, this is all, we're on our own S curve of where these things kind of evolve, but
Mhm.
introducing a couple of assessments, because one of the things that we find in that discovery and assessment phase is people tend to have not been that self-reflective. And
Yeah.
even to the extent they are, they tend to lack the vocabulary. And so bringing in some validated third-party assessment tools that help people get clarity but also give language to
Yeah.
their value proposition is a big piece of the fever breaking and unlocking people from being kind of in that stuck and don't feel like I'm making any progress to being able to start to take off and move on to the next in fast and fun phase.
Yeah. I have a question for you. I'm wondering, do you find you mentioned, not aware. And I
Hmm.
think we talk a lot about being not aware of our blind spots or our weaknesses or not wanting to
Yeah.
see them. But do you also find that people aren't aware of their strengths? Not really. Or if they are sort of aware of them, they have at some level rejected their strengths. And so part of the work that you do with people is getting them to identify but also own and value what they do well.
Well, God bless you, and yes, because we actually use Clifton Strengths for that
Yeah.
exact reason.
Mm.
And to to be able to identify what their strengths are, because a lot of times what we find is at least a couple of phenomenon, there's probably a few more, but is either, but that's just what I do. And so I don't think it's anything special. It's just what I do. Yeah,
Right.
but you're really good on the piano, Whitney. Like, not everybody's good at this.
Uh-huh.
You're really good at picking stocks. Like, not everybody's good at this. And so, well, but it's just what I do. I just go to work. And that's not an uncommon thing. The more common thing is people's, the way they usually say is, but I don't want to brag. I feel like I'm bragging, and I don't want to brag. And so the way that we help them frame that then is, to be able to say something along the lines of, Whitney, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Clifton Strength Finders, and most
Hmm.
people are because it's got pretty high name recognition.
Right.
I went through that, and one of the things that I learned about myself was, a big thing for me is connectedness. And what that means
Mhm.
is, and the way that's played out in my career is X. And
Oh, that's
so
really good. Okay, so here are my 5 strengths. One of mine is relator. And so the way that this plays out in my career is X, Y, or Z. So they're able to give people, that's great. I love that. And I bet that's a real unlock for people.
it's a huge unlock for people
Hmm.
because, when you're trying to demonstrate your value, first of all, to yourself, again, you have to believe, you have to have the convictions in your
Hmm.
own mind and heart of what it is that you do. That's what gives you the confidence to be able to do it in a way that's authentic,
Yeah.
believable, without being obnoxious. And so, we're going to talk about storytelling somewhere in all this because I want to
Okay.
get into that.
All right.
But but when we're telling a story, think like in an interview, and at my company, I was able to pick 10 of the 12 fastest growing stocks in this segment of the marketplace that I cover. That resulted in capital or market value, market cap increases
Mhm.
of X. Okay, that's true, but that's kind of a two-dimensional way of viewing it. The third
Huh.
dimension is being able to bring in one of my personal qualities that I identified through Clifton Strengths was my strategic. And what that means is that I'm able to see things that are kind of loosely connected, and it
Mm.
just sort of appears to me sooner than it tends to appear to other people. Since the stock market's a forward-looking instrument, that's a really helpful skill to have. And so
Yeah.
that's played out in my ability to
Oh,
see market
Bob.
trends.
Mm. And what's great
Yeah,
about that is you're giving people the person you're giving the person who's interviewing you a container to put what you've just shared with them about yourself in, and it doesn't feel like you're bragging. You're more of just identifying and sort of, let's look at this thing out there and let me show this to you. And so I could see that's really, I love that.
yeah, and thank you. And again, it's to your point. It's just a statement of fact. If we lived in San
Mhm.
Diego where the weather's pretty all the time, well,
Mhm.
I live in San Diego. It's like, well, no, it's 72. That's just a statement of fact. It is what it is,
Yeah.
and I'm not bragging about it. I'm just, you asked me what the weather was like. I told you it's 72.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
so
Huh.
um, we find that the ability to do the strengths and then to understand people's communication styles, my own communication style and your preferred communication style, are
Mhm.
two really big unlocks to help people, one, know their story, and then two, to be able to communicate it in an empathetic way.
Are there
In the way,
assessments for the communication style that you're doing as well, or
yeah,
no?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we've reversed the podcast interview session here. Yeah, we use.
Sorry. I'm
No,
curious.
it's fine.
We can keep going.
No, we use DISC,
Okay, got it. Got it. Got it.
right? And so
So
that
DISC for
that's been
communication and then Clifton for the strengths.
for the strengths, and then we
Mm.
kind of weave all that together with actual accomplishments, contributions that you have made in different roles, to weave those into stories, and then you've
Mm.
got a portfolio of stories. Like I think of it as like a playlist,
Yeah.
and then you don't need 100 answers for 100 questions. You need about 10 or 12, and then the magic is knowing how to remix those tunes
Huh.
in a way that you want to hear it in a country beat. I want to hear it in a classic rock beat, and somebody else wants to hear it in a hip hop beat. It's the same melody. It's just being played differently in a way that's contextualized to the opportunity and to the person that you're talking to.
Mm, mm. I love that. The musician in me loves that. You change different
See,
beat.
see.
Fantastic.
Um, so this is fun. I knew we would have a good time. Um, I want to talk about I want to talk about dreams. I want to
Okay.
talk about disruption and what you've observed that holds people back from
Mm.
fulfilling the potential that they've got.
I think what I have found most holds people back is what is going on in their mind. So I don't want to diminish the fact that people have different starting points. People have different levels of privilege. Where they were born, what time they were born, what gender they were born. All those different things. So I don't want to diminish that. But but we all know people who have been born with very, very little and accomplished so much. And then we
Yeah.
know people that, from a privilege standpoint, have been born with so much and accomplished so little. And so the differentiating factor is, what do they believe about themselves? What do they believe about possibility? What do they believe? And are they agentic? Do they believe that they can affect the future? Do they believe that they can change? Do they believe that they can grow? Do they believe that growth is their default setting, or don't they? And so if we that's the differentiating factor, and it always is going to come, if you look at yourself and things that you might have wanted to have achieved and haven't quite yet, and I look at as well, we can look at some percentage of this is the system, some percentages of this is the people around us, but what percentage is me? And almost always I have far more control over the outcome than I think I do. That willingness to take 100% responsibility, to act and not be acted upon, that is always going to be that differentiating factor. So again, don't want to diminish the starting point, but it ultimately comes down to how we're choosing to think about ourselves and how we're choosing to think about the world.
So I'm smiling because the master class that we provide to our clients, our members, is called Making Your Own Weather, and it's all about agency. Yes,
Mhm.
it's raining. Yes, it's cold. Yes, it's whatever. I'm not denying the reality of what is,
Mhm. Mhm.
and you can't control that. The weather is what it is. But but you've always got control over your attitude, and you've always got control over your actions. You have agency every moment of every day. My question for you, Whitney, is do you believe, or what's your experience with people being able to change their sense of agency? Or
Mm.
do people have a pretty hardwired, and it's if I don't believe I can change, I can't? Or can people be taught, no, actually you can change. You do have more
Yeah.
agency than you.
You know, I, I think the answer is yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, I think about my own life. Um, we do have certain wiring, and so it's going to be easier for some people than others. But at the same time, I do believe that we can choose to change. We can make a decision that we're going to be 100% responsible for our life, that our brains are actually wired to change. We have the equipment to do that. And so it's a question of, are we going to make the decision to do it? So yes, we can. Every single person on this planet can, because that's how we were built and constructed. And we need to make the decision that we're going to do it. And for some of us, it's going to be harder than others, but we still can do it.
Yeah, we can choose to change. That is such
Yeah, yeah.
that's
I
great.
feel like I'm speaking. Yeah, I feel like I'm speaking in generality. So if
No, no, no,
maybe
that's a
one more.
great. I'm
Okay,
embracing that term. I
okay,
think that's a really
okay.
cool term. We can choose to. You can choose to change,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's an epiphany for a lot of people. And just thinking about disrupt yourself and things that are disruptive. Sometimes the way even the title implies, you can disrupt yourself. Oftentimes we
Right.
find, again, because of where we tend to meet people is in job search, they've been laid off or whatever's
Mhm.
happened, that they didn't choose the disruption, but they've, you know, turned it into a benefit finding exercise. So I wouldn't have chosen this for myself on its face, but
Right.
what's the good that can come out of this? And so when we
Yeah.
start to benefit find, that creates hope, optimism, future, not looking
Mhm.
back. I'm curious how that fits into how you think about stuff.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting because I have lost a job, and I think, 25 probably to 30% of our population, has lost a job at least. And my hypothesis actually is that at some level we knew it was time for us to do something different, but we weren't quite ready to get there for whatever reason. And the
Yeah.
universe kind of moved us along. And Oh, I also find, and I think this was the case for me, is that we often, when we do lose a job, when we look back, if we're willing to be agentic and say, okay, not why am I here? Why did this happen? But now that I'm here, what do I want to do with this? How do I
Yes.
want to turn this into a gift? How do I want to make, how am I going to choose to make meaning of this? And this goes a little bit to some a priori assumptions that we might have about the universe. If we believe, and I do believe, that we are on this planet to develop a character, to develop as a human being, then I can take a job loss and make meaning of it in a way that this is a gift for me to grow as a human being. And in the end, I will be a better person than I was when this happened if I choose to turn my constraint into a tool of creation.
Yeah. So this is very, in line with like Viktor Frankl, right? In Man's Search for
Mhm.
Meaning and
Mhm.
logotherapy, which is finding meaning in things, which is different than finding blame or
Oh, yeah.
other avenues. It's finding, why am I a victim versus, well, what's the meaning? How can I grow? How can I serve in the midst of what I've
Yeah.
been presented with? That is so empowering for people. I think that is like one of life's biggest unlocks is
Mhm.
finding your purpose in this versus other alternatives that people could choose.
Yeah, and you know what's I found for me, Bob, and I suspect this is true for most of us, is that there are certain places where we're actually really good at having a growth mindset of making meaning of, oh, this happened and this was tough and here's what I figured out and here's what I learned. And we all, not all, but many of us also have Achilles heels where there's certain areas or certain pockets of our lives where when something difficult happens, it's very challenging to go into that place of growth mindset. So that's those are the real growth edges for us in terms of our as a
Yes.
human being and character. And so I think it's very much a continuum. Like we talk about growth mindset, but I think we all have a growth mindset until we don't. And so it's in that place where, right? Where we want to give
That's fun.
ourselves compassion and say, okay, I in this particular arena, I don't have a growth mindset. So what do I want to do here? And also, I've been thinking a lot about compassion, not self-pity, but compassion and saying, I don't have a growth mindset here. There probably for good reason. There was something that happened in my childhood that made it so I didn't. But now, what again? Not why, but what do I want to do that with this? Because that allows us to be an agent, not be a victim, and move forward as people.
Well, it's I'm probably being slow getting to your party here, but even as you were describing sort of those edgy things,
Uh-huh.
is the opportunity to enter into an S curve in that
Yep.
arena, in that area of my life, but with the understanding that I'm not going to have mastery. In fact, I'm not even going to be in a flow state for maybe a
Mhm.
while, but it's just the fact of starting and just embracing it. Like I'm just going to make little baby steps and we'll get there when we get there. But what I'm not going to do is opt out of being on that S curve.
Right. I'm not going to give up. I won't give up. I think
Right.
that's the key. Is like I'm gonna persist. And one of the things that will often happen with, a new S curve is that, because it's so uncomfortable and it feels painful in some ways of being uncertain. And, when you're looking for a new job, there, we have to ask ourselves the question of, okay, so is this painful? And does this mean that it's the wrong S curve because I'm super uncomfortable? Or does it just mean I haven't been here long enough to have enough data to know if it's going to make sense or not? And I think
Mm.
that's where, our loved ones, where our truth tellers, where good coaching, where the career club can come in of saying, actually, if I look at all your strengths, you're strategic. I look at all those things. It does make sense for you to be here, but you just haven't been here long enough. So persist a little bit longer. Get a little bit more data before you give up and decide this S curve or this opportunity or this track isn't for you.
That's a great insight. And where we see that playing out a lot is by getting people in community. So
Mm,
people are at different places on the S curve.
yep.
And and so being able to see, Susan, who's been in this just a little bit longer, who can be empathetic and say, Whitney, I know how you feel. I felt the exact same way. What I found was, and you're going to find it too, just don't
Mhm.
give up. And
Right.
some days we're the encourager, some days we need the encouragement. But that's for me is the beauty of being in community, so
Hmm.
that you don't just get lost in the fear, the doubt, the whatever things might be trying to get you off that curve and to
Yeah.
quit. Did
Yeah.
you find that in kind of personal development, how important community really is?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's important. So I think when I think about community, I think of it in a number of different ways. So there can be the community of you're in on a team with other people, but I think if you're looking for a job, then maybe not the community, but you're creating these cohorts, and that's why we talk about different kinds of diversity you want to have. It's going to be a
Yeah,
lot harder for you from a coaching standpoint of if everybody's at the launch point, everybody just lost their job. That's difficult because everybody's having the same experience. But as you just pointed out, if I've got some people who are a little bit further along, they've figured out what their message is, they're in the sweet spot, they're now just in that finding and identifying the right position for them, or they've actually now taken a job and they're, right before they started, so they're in mastery. There's that stabilizing influence of having people at different points along that S curve. So I think in that instance, the community is important. And then the community in terms of having truth tellers in our lives of saying,
yes,
I know you lost your job and this feels absolutely horrible, but it doesn't mean that you're not worthy. It doesn't mean that you're not worthwhile. It doesn't mean that you don't matter. And that's where the community of family and friends becomes very, very important because when we lose a job, it's a very fragile place. Our identity has completely been dismantled at some level because work is so much a part of our identity. And we really do not only need that community of, okay, here's the process, the functional part of doing this, but the loved
yeah,
ones around us to shore us up and help us feel like, no, you still matter. It's just that you're in a liminal space and you're going to figure it out. I know you can figure it out.
yeah. No, that's really spot on. And it's yes at the onset of the process, but the way I say it is the road to yes is littered with no. So there's a lot of rejection that goes on along the way. And
Mm-hmm.
so, we use a little acrostic about keep an even keel, KEEL.
Yeah.
Know that you're going to land. Emotional ups and downs are part of the ride.
Mm,
Expect the best from yourself and from others. And the L is let go of the past. Being
mm,
angry and
mm.
metastasize anger is bitterness. And I
Yeah.
think it's Nelson Mandela. Bitterness is like swallowing poison and waiting for your enemy to die. So
Yeah.
you've got to let go of the past. You've got to be future forward.
Hmm.
Um, we need that for the whole duration because it is a very bumpy ride getting to the next role, and trying to do that by yourself tends to be challenging for a lot of
Oh,
people.
I wouldn't you argue that it's pretty much impossible to do it by yourself? I mean, the cobbler's children has no shoes. It's very difficult to identify what your strengths are. It's very difficult to figure out what your message is. I mean, have you ever met anybody who can do that job search by themselves?
I haven't. The issue is you just helping people understand this is going to get you to where you want to be in a better way, in a faster
Mhm,
way.
mhm.
But when people are in job search, there's a lot of fear that's
Yeah.
associated with
Oh,
it,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
and a
Fear
lot of
and shame,
stress.
right?
Well, there's fear, confusion. I don't even know what to do because it's not even a defined process. There's shame, which is
Mhm,
very key, and there's
mhm.
anger and upset. So, and all
Yeah.
those kind of conspire and crop up at different levels, in different times. But the reality of just being under financial pressure that
Mhm,
people feel, and why aren't you investing in something? Because I'm afraid to, because
mhm.
financially I don't feel like I'm in a place where I can do that. And so people would acknowledge the benefits. There's just a fear of stepping
Yeah,
out
yeah. It's
and
quite a
making an
cocktail.
investment.
It's quite a cocktail.
Yeah, it is. It is. I want to be respectful of your time because this
Oh,
is
yeah.
amazing. With I want to think just a little bit about action steps.
Mhm,
So if we can agree, and if somebody listening to this podcast or watching us on YouTube is like, that sounds really inspiring, but I still feel kind of stuck.
mhm.
What are just one, two, three kind of practical things, Whitney, that you might encourage somebody that they could do pretty much today to
Yeah.
start to make progress to the life that they really want to be living?
Okay. Yeah. So I would say the first thing is to draw out the S curve that we talked about and to see where you are, and if you're at the launch point of the curve, to just know that this is normal and that in fact you're growing really quickly. You just can't see it, and so to uh, pull out a picture of yourself when you were really young and look at it and say, I wouldn't beat up this 5 year old. I wouldn't beat up this 8 year old. Why am I beating up myself right now? And just say,
Mm.
I'm doing this new thing and I'm feeling really uncomfortable and this is normal and it's going to be okay. So that would be the first thing that I would encourage people to do. The second thing would be is sometimes when we're in that place of confusion and I'm not sure what to do, we start to set too big of goals, and so I would harness the
Mm.
power of dopamine. Dopamine kicks in when you get this upside surprise, and so if you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm going to reach out to 5 people today and look for a job. Maybe it's not 5 people. Maybe it's I'm going to draft a really bad draft of an email that I want to send to someone. I'm going to check it on Chat GPT, have someone else look at it, and I'm going to send it to someone that feels somewhat safe to send it to, so that you're making it even smaller. Like give yourself such small goals that will only take you a couple minutes just to start to build that momentum and build that confidence. And then the third thing that I would really encourage you to do is, if you're not already, go outside and exercise, take a walk, be outdoors for even 15 minutes. And I'm going to give you a fourth thing is to be aware of your
Bonus.
yeah, you be aware of your language that you're using of I have to or I'm bad at. Your language, the power of your words is what creates your reality. And so use words like I choose. If you want to use the words I am, I am smart or I am figuring this out. I haven't figured it out yet. And so really be
Mhm.
aware of your self-talk. And if you find yourself using self talk that isn't positive, say, oh, I just noticed I'm using not positive self talk. Don't beat yourself up, but just be aware of it.
Mhm.
And so those would be my 4 suggestions of things that you can do today, right now, that will help you have that mindset that you want and need to move off the launch point of this curve and go into your next gig, your next job, your next opportunity, which, if you will use this as an opportunity, this constraint as a tool of creation, it will allow you to be more of who you are and turn into possibility and an even happier life than you currently have, because you took this opportunity and made it and used it as a gift.
Wow. Whitney, I can't do better than that. I'm going to end on a very, very high note. I think I could talk to you for hours and hours. There's so much that you're offering, so much value that you're delivering to individuals, to companies, to your clients. If people want to learn more about you and your company, what's the best way to do that?
Mm. I think the best way is we have a website. It's the disruptionadvisors.com. If you want to learn more about, me generally, you can listen to the podcast, but a good starting place is to go just to our website and poke around. We have certification in smart growth. We do coaching, we do offsites. We have a tool and assessment that allows you to see where you are on the S curve and also see what the weather is like, and assess if it's conducive to growth. So those are all some just different ways that we could engage.
Awesome. And I would just throw in, please follow Whitney on LinkedIn. I think you've got 1 billion uh, followers, 1.8 million. I think seriously, I've really enjoyed following you. You post regularly. It's always encouraging, uplifting, but instructive. And I
Mm-hmm.
find great value in that. So thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Bob.
No, thank you. And thanks everyone for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe and comment. If you're listening to this on audio on your favorite podcast platform, please rate and review. It really does help. And with that, Whitney, thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.
I know